So last year was a really, really interesting year. There was certainly a lot of growth in the whole SDN ecosystem, including in ONF. And we have huge membership growth, up to 96 member companies. But our work got very concrete last year, and it also expanded in scope in SDN. You recall that a year ago we announced that we declared OpenFlow 1.3.x family to be a stable target for implementers. So we've been coming out with revisions 2-3 times a year. So we can't keep up. And proved in hindsight to have been a good decision, because a lot of implementers are now focusing on 1.3. We've come up with one update to it, and we're doing a second one this week, which they're not new features, they're just clarifications and fixes in that. And now that we're starting to look at features for 1.4, say, we are going to continue to support 1.3 indefinitely. We also put a closure around 1.0 by doing an errata update to it that we published. We inherited 1.0, but we published 1.0.1. Things we learned in our Plugfest, some little things I missed in 1.0. We put that out there. That's done. We're not doing anything more with 1.0. So our thrust for the next year has 4 components to it, one of which is to build out the OpenFlow substrate. I mean, we're all about SDN as a whole, but OpenFlow is this foundational component. Yeah. And so this work we've done in the OpenFlow protocol versions 1.3.x is an important part of making that industrial strength.
Got it.
We also, as part of the substrate, updated the OpenFlow configuration protocol.
And then when you talk about 1.4 or future revisions and the like, and I know you probably have a lot of discussions with your members, but is there a focus maybe to have a bleeding edge for development where features are backported, stable? So 2 streams of development, or is there a different line of reasoning?
So we've also made some changes in how we do these standards. For one thing, we're now requiring new features to be implemented with working code and demonstrated, so we can see that they actually do work before they go into the spec. And we're also bundling new features together as sort of a separate little component without having to constantly update the base spec. So the base specs will stay pretty stable. When we have enough experience with the cluster of new features, then we'll incorporate them into the base spec.
Correctly, with 1.3 there was an element of hardware that was required, if I'm not mistaken. When we're talking about forward-moving specs, how important a role is silicon versus just software? Is it stuff that needs to always be embedded in silicon?
So some people have interpreted 1.3 as being, and even 1.1 as being hardware-oriented and requiring TCAMs, and that's not the case. Okay. But we do understand that there have been challenges from the industry in implementing OpenFlow beyond 1.0, and so one of our thrusts for this next year is to foster implementation and deployment, including the cultivation of a supply chain for physical switches, hardware switches, not just software and hypervisor switches. So we have 2 particular thrusts there. One is our forwarding abstractions working group, which is developing what are called table typing patterns that allow you to pre-compile the pipeline in a switch so that it can look like it's doing tables, certain kinds of table structures. And that should allow current merchant silicon to implement the 1.123 versions of OpenFlow. And the other thing we're doing is looking at how you can actually evolve the chips to have more direct support of OpenFlow. And so we have announced and chartered and are just now starting to recruit members for a chip makers advisory board that'll advise the ONF board of directors on a roadmap for what silicon can do, some advice for ONF on how we can help foster advances in chip design, and what we might want to do with our technical program in ONF as a consequence.
When I spoke with you last year, I didn't hear any. I didn't hear much negative sentiment towards OpenFlow. For better or for worse, over the last year, every vendor and their brother is saying, "Oh, you don't have to do SDN with OpenFlow," as a way of almost bashing it or whatever. So, and I know you're prepared for this one. How do you see some of these comments in light of the fact that OpenFlow can enable more than simple overlay?
I think all the incumbents now have announced support for OpenFlow. So
Yeah.
they're saying one thing, but look what they're doing. We are trying to move networking into a user-driven, standards-based environment in which the users have said we don't want vendor lock-in, we don't want proprietary solutions, we don't want proprietary protocols. OpenFlow is the standard, and it serves user needs great. You have to ask the vendors how well it serves their individual needs, but we think it creates a big market opportunity for an industry that will probably go through some restructuring.
Typically, the negative sentiment is OpenFlow requires forklift upgrade, which I know is not necessarily the case, because sometimes you can do this just in software. But for argument's sake, I have an existing network today. Some switches OpenFlow, some not. I can still benefit from OpenFlow. Is that the right way of thinking of it?
Look at what Stanford Computer Science did.
Yeah.
They added OpenFlow switches one at a time.
Yeah.
From HP. It's very early days. And they segregated the traffic by VLAN. And eventually they didn't have any conventional switches left. And if you notice, HP and other vendors have now announced free software downloads to existing switches in the field, the entire product line, no forklift upgrade. Just download the client, it'll run OpenFlow, and you can turn it on as you wish. You can segregate it as you wish. So for a radically transformative technology, this one is, I think, the easiest one to migrate to that I've ever seen in my career.
And then I won't even ask what the question is, but OpenDaylight, what's your thoughts? Is it something that's complementary, competitive, something you can work with or work against?
OpenDaylight is a vendor-led group that is implementing what we produce and building on top of what we produce. So an SDN stack based on a controller with an announced OpenFlow southbound interface. Mm-hmm. So we produce that as the foundation people to build stuff on top of. So we're delighted to see open source industry efforts to instantiate these abstract standards. That's exactly what should happen.
And the fact that it's a separate organization as opposed to under the auspices of the Open Networking Foundation is neither here nor there?
We didn't start out as a software organization.
Okay.
We have announced that we are sponsoring a competition for an open source OpenFlow driver to go into a controller. Really just a stub that'll take care of the OpenFlow protocol, allow you to evolve as the protocol evolves, and put your software resources into what makes a controller a great controller, or great control applications, or great business applications. We are about much more than OpenFlow. But we are doing the OpenFlow protocol because if we don't do it, nobody else will. And it's going to be the vendor-neutral, standard, take-for-granted way of communicating between a separated control plane and a distributed multiple forwarding plane. But the activities we have to support services above OpenFlow are really important. And that includes not just the Northbound API and OA&M, but the work we're doing in architecture and framework, and our support for the ETSI NFV industry specification group for network functions virtualization. The challenge with a new technology is to get the market to understand it, get the customers to see the benefit, get the vendors to know what to implement, and the users to know what to deploy and how to go about doing so. So our migration working group is going to help them find smooth paths to get from here to there without going through dead ends. And I think the challenge will be to kind of corral all the energy into as much forward progress as possible.